Feel free, anyone who's attending, to use the link that I'm sharing in the chat right now to share any contact information that you feel comfortable. It's certainly not a requirement, but if you feel like you would like to share your contact information with others and use this to connect with people after the session, you're welcome to do that. It's 11 o'clock, so we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you all for being here. We have a huge number of attendees. Looks like there's 75 people on the call. We have almost 170 people registered. It's a lot. And we're super excited to kick off the Oklahoma Learning Innovation Summit with this first in a series of online events this year. My name is Simon Ringsmith. I'm a digital services librarian at Oklahoma State University. And I'm on the Cole Advanced Technologies panel along with Alicia Ridnour. Hi, Alicia. And Crystal Smith. The three of us have been working to put together this panel, and we're so glad that you all can be here. We've got a fantastic 2 hours ahead of us. Might seem like a lot, but the time goes really quickly. This is our second panel like this that we've hosted. Last year it was on esports. Had a great time, a lot of good discussion. We look forward to that again today. The format of the session is for about the first 5 minutes here, I'm welcoming people, and then I'm going to introduce the panelists, and then I'm going to turn it over to Laura Dummin for about a half an hour or so. She's got a presentation. After that, it's going to be a moderated panel discussion where we've got questions that we've sent the panelists in advance, and they're going to be answering a lot of questions that are just common to AI right now and higher education. And then we're going to open it up for anyone to ask questions. We do ask that when we get to that portion that you type your questions in the chat rather than say them out loud, just because it's easier to sort through them and to make sure that we address them. So one more time, I'm going to paste the link in the chat to the contact form. Again, this is only as much information as you would like to share. And there's a section in there that says notes. Feel free to add anything that might help add context to you and your position, so that people can use that to know who they're talking to later on. With that being said, I'm going to introduce our panelists in alphabetical order. We have Dr. Bucky Dodd. He is the Chief Executive Officer and principal consultant at Clear Kinetic, a boutique consultancy specializing in creating one-of-a-kind education and training solutions. As a creative designer, master facilitator, and a results-driven strategist, Dr. Dodd brings a wealth of experience and expertise to developing education and training solutions that unify sound learning and business practices. He's been recognized internationally for his consulting and design expertise, has a proven record of leading innovation initiatives in associations, corporate government, and education organizations. And I can tell you, I've known Bucky for a long time. He's just a great guy, one of the most positive, uplifting people I have had the pleasure of serving with or meeting and serving with. We also have Dr. Laura Dummin. Dr. Dummin received her MS at Radford University in English, with areas in technical writing and women's literature. She received her PhD at OSU in English, with areas in technical writing and composition and rhetoric. Dummin has been at UCO for a little over a decade, since 2011, and is currently the director of the Technical Writing BA program, the advisor for the MA in Composition Rhetoric, and a co-managing editor for the Journal of Transformative Learning out of UCO. Thank you, Dr. Dummin. Dr. Amanda Cassie. Amanda is the manager of academic technology. And I should say all of the panelists have that background, that black and green background. So you'll know the panelists by their background. Amanda is the manager of academic technology and technology training at UCO, where she also works as an instructor. Dr. Cassie has experience in educational technology, adult education, training consulting, and project management, including over 10 years of experience working with learning management systems and educational technology systems. Amanda has spent her career working with educators on the use of technology in transformative teaching and learning experience. And finally, we have Alicia Ropp. She is an online teaching support specialist here at OSU's Institute for Teaching and Learning Excellence. and she's leading the way in applying AI to higher education. With a deep commitment to enhancing student learning, Alicia leverages her expertise in technology to assist instructors in integrating educational tools and online best practices. Alicia holds an MA in Curriculum and Instruction with an emphasis in TESOL, which I forget what that means, from the University of Kansas. There's so many acronyms in higher education. Alicia brings over 15 years of combined K through 12 and higher education experience, including an adjunct professorship at OSU's College of Education. Her innate talent for utilizing technology for engaging learning experiences has been a hallmark of her career. Regarding AI, recognized for her leadership in AI advancements, Alicia directs initiatives here at OSU. She offers workshops and materials on AI's practical application in teaching with a focus on course design and authentic learning. Her pioneering workshop, AI to Enhance Teaching and Learning, has impacted over 600 faculty members, helped foster discussions on innovative teaching approaches. Alicia remains dedicated to guiding faculty through the challenges of integrating AI into education with a commitment to ethical, human-centered practices. Her goal is to unlock the full potential of AI in higher education and ensure a transformative and inclusive learning experience. I've been to her workshops. She is awesome. She does a great job. We're so glad to have her here at OSU. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Dumman for the presentation, and I'm going to continue to share the link in the chat to the contact spreadsheet. And Dr. Dumman has also, in the chat, she has a website that's an AI repository, and she's updating it as she finds new things. And the link for that is in the chat as well. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Dumman. Thank you so much.
All right. Hopefully my slides are showing up so everybody can see those. Yes, I put the link to the Facebook group in there and to my website. With that Facebook group, if you do decide you want to join it, we've got about 4,900 educators and people within the education system in there now. And it's not a place for us to gripe about AI. It's a place for us to ask questions and learn together. I've designed it like a learning community, and we tend to do a pretty good job of staying that way. So I've also put my website on there, and yeah, I'm updating it as we go. I am a professor in English and technical writing, and I do a lot of things in that field. I also have done a lot of scholarship of teaching and learning projects, which I think led me to be comfortable running an IRB in the spring. And I decided to just see what was going to happen with AI because, back in January, we didn't really know what was going to happen. And so I was excited. So I put this IRB together, and the whole point of it was basically to use pre and post reflections to see what students knew about AI, and then to see what they learned and to kind of gauge how they were feeling about it. Because again, we didn't know what was going to happen. I'm also the AI coordinator for the University of Central Oklahoma, and I see some of my team members here on the call. So it's good to see you all here today as well. All right, so I wanted us to think for a minute about some of these fears that are surrounding the talk about AI, and especially with the writing classroom, which is where I spend obviously a lot of my time. People were very worried back at the beginning of the spring that AI was going to take our jobs, and it was going to make it so that students didn't have to come to class, pay attention in class, whatever. So we kind of thought that it was the end of education. And it seems like for the most part, those fears were overblown. But I caveat that. One of the things that I have found just from talking to other people in this last year is that instructors who put some sort of guidelines into their classrooms about what AI could be used for, what they might do with it, people who put in AI literacy into their classrooms, they found that cheating wasn't such a big deal. Students weren't going that route. But for instructors who didn't put any guidelines in place, who didn't talk to their students about AI, students were using AI however they wanted to use it. And as we know, people don't always make the best choices with a technology if they don't understand the technology. So I think one of the things that we need to be aware of is that it's important for us to talk to our students. It's important for us to have policies at the campus level, as well as maybe at the department or college level, and as well as at the personal level, so that we are dealing with this AI as a tool and not necessarily just assuming that everybody's cheating. I took um, a poll of students yesterday. I was guest teaching in a class, and I think there were 16 students in that class, and these were all first year students. And I said, "How many of you all have used AI?" And 2 people raised their hands. And we're in what, week 4, the end of week 4 of our semester, and we still only had 2 students in that class. So I think some of those fears of everybody moving to AI instead of doing their own work were also overblown, because a lot of our students just honestly don't feel comfortable with it yet. All right, just in case we hadn't had this conversation yet, I wanted to talk about some of the popular AI writing programs. ChatGPT is the one that most people are familiar with. These are all large language models, um, and they are predictive text builders. So if you're using ChatGPT, it might sound humanistic. Same thing with Bing, Bard, and Claude, but they're all just building off of large predictive text databases. They also use different sets of data, which is really interesting. So with all of these, they scraped lots of different data to build their systems. Like with ChatGPT, if you're using the free version, it's 3.5 turbo, which can take more tokens or parts of words, but stops its database information at about September of 21. Whereas Bing Chat is using GPT-4, and it can take fewer tokens or parts of words, but it has a larger database. Bard just had a huge infusion of money a few weeks back. That's Google's baby, and they are still, I think, a distant third. A lot of people weren't pleased with how Bard was rolling out, and so they haven't switched to it necessarily. Claude also got a big update a few weeks ago and seems to be doing a lot more. So I see some of my colleagues switching over to Claude. For the most part, I've been using ChatGPT and Bing Chat simply because those handle the information that I need to. And actually, Bucky introduced me the other day to Gamma, so I got to use Gamma to build a PowerPoint that I had access to. So that was pretty cool. Let's see. All right, so a few definitions that I wanted to just put out here. And I know that for a lot of us, these definitions don't necessarily matter, but people do talk about these two things as if they were the same, and they are slightly different. Generative AI is used for mimicking human output in art. So it's doing music, it's doing videos, it's doing images, and that is generative AI. Large language models are those predictive text builders that are what cause chatbots to work. So we do tend to use those terms interchangeably. And again, it's not super important that you know the difference, but I do like to point that out just so that people are aware. As we think about the value of AI in our classrooms, there are some things that we can do with it. It can help us with difficult content in neutral language. And one of the things I actually saw this morning was some students talking about needing to write emails to their professors. So it's not just us when we need help writing emails, maybe to our dean or to our manager, or maybe we have somebody who's angry with us and we need to change that tone. Our students can use it too to help them write more professional emails. And that way, they're not writing something. I've gotten emails before that were literally just, "What did I miss?" Not, "Hi, professor," not, "I'm in your XYZ class," anything like that. Just literally, "What did I miss?" And I've had to write back and say, "I don't know who you are. I don't know which class you're in. Can you give me a little bit more?" So things like that can be really helpful for students, especially if we have students who are first gen or who are not aware of some of the structural needs within email. It can help with translation. It's really good at that. And I know that a lot of modern languages professors are concerned that their students are going to offload their translation work to ChatGPT or Bing instead of doing it themselves. And I think that that's something that, modern language instructors definitely need to address with their students, and to explain to them where the AI makes sense to use and where it doesn't make sense to use. But I'm also thinking about research. Up until very recently, if we had a paper in another language that we wanted to read, we either had to put it through Google Translate and hope for the best, or we had to know how to read that language. And now we can find papers in other languages that we can go out and use. And I think that that's actually really powerful, because we have a tendency to assume that a lot of work is only being done in English, because that is kind of the language of STEM and for a lot of journals. But this allows a broader use of voices, so we can have other people come into our discussions and we can hear voices from around the world instead of just English speaking countries. If you can write job reports, I have to justify my existence in two different positions at the end of the school year. And I can take the information that I've done, I can say, here's a bullet point list of all the things I did this last year, write it up in paragraph form for me. And it can put that together. I do want to clarify that just because I would have ChatGPT possibly write this report for me doesn't mean I'm going to turn in what ChatGPT says. So for example, with that Gamma presentation I made the other day, I still had to spend another 3 to 4 hours on the content, making sure that it was right, that it was in my voice, and then I had to put it into somebody else's template. So we want to make sure that we are questioning and double checking any of the output that these AI programs give us, because otherwise we might turn in things that are just plain wrong or problematic. With homework answers, our students might choose to use ChatGPT for homework assistance. And in some cases, that's okay. But we do want to make sure that students, especially in the STEM areas, understand that any of these AI programs can give them answers and they can sound very confident with themselves, but they might not actually be right. So if you question ChatGPT, it will get deferential and it'll say, oh, I'm so sorry, I only have information up to September 21. Information on math may have changed since I was last looking at it. And you're like, oh, really? That's interesting. Bing, on the other hand, will suggest that perhaps you are wrong and it is very right. So you also want to make sure that you understand that these different AIs have, I'm not going to call them personalities, but they definitely have ways that they output the information. They can give summaries of long texts, which again is really helpful if we think about our own research and even student research. If we've got a number of papers that we're trying to get through and figure out which ones deserve our attention to read the full papers and which ones maybe aren't as helpful for us, then we can have these AI programs write summaries for us. Bing Chat is really good. If you just put the URL in and you ask it for a summary, it can do that for you very quickly. And that's really nice. And then you can see, what are the main 5 points or whatever of this particular essay? Does it make sense for me to read it based on what I'm trying to do with my research? So we can streamline our research process to an extent. Our students can do that as well. And I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing, as long as students understand that they do then have to interact more deeply with the articles that they're planning to reference in their papers. As far as the writing process goes, it can write decent-ish lyrics and poetry, although it's pretty much always going to do it in rhyming scheme. So even if you go in and say, please do not write me rhyming poetry, it's still going to do that. So we're a little ways away from really good creative output with some of these AIs, but I think we're probably going to get there sooner rather than later. With essays, I was talking to somebody the other day who said that for their students were using GPT-4. They were using the paid version of ChatGPT, and that it did a really good job on upper level essays. For our students at UCO, most of them are probably not going to be paying the $20 a month to have access to that. So they might switch over to Bing, which in that case would give them GPT-4. But if they're using ChatGPT, the free version, the essays that it puts out are not the greatest. They're a little bit boring, stilted. They don't go very deeply into the topics, and it doesn't do a really great job with upper division papers. So I think that's another thing where it's worth talking to students about the information and saying, hey, look at the output here. What would you change? What would you shift? What do you like? What don't you like? And kind of playing around with that. And then as we're thinking about brainstorming and drafting, we have a number of students who get freaked out, scared, bothered, panicked, frozen, whatever, from the brainstorming and drafting stages. And maybe they're neurodiverse, maybe they just have high anxiety, but that brainstorming stage can be really difficult for them. And I'm one of those people who doesn't brainstorm well. If you ask me even a question as simple as what kind of music do I like, I'm going to freeze up. I don't know. Now, if you didn't ask me and I just had a chance to talk about it on my own, that would be different. But I don't brainstorm well. So I can go into ChatGPT or one of the other programs and ask it for some brainstorming ideas. What are some hobbies that people do? What are some types of foods that people like to cook? Whatever the question is. And it can give me some ideas, and then I can go forward from there. With the drafting process, as long as students are aware, and as long as we're aware, again, that we need to check those drafts, we need to look at them, make sure that A, the information is right, B, the information sounds like us, C, it's useful, that sort of thing, then it can be really helpful at the drafting stages to get students started. One of the things that I like about the idea of using AI at the beginning of the process is we have students who might otherwise check out and not do the project at all. And that doesn't help them. They haven't engaged with any of the material. They haven't engaged with whatever it is that we want them to do. So maybe having a little bit of help at that brainstorming and drafting stage gets them to the point where they can engage more deeply with the information and actually complete the project. And that helps them to gain value from their education instead of that moment of just stepping away and failing, which I have seen happen often at the first year composition level, unfortunately. Okay, we also talk about AI literacy. So it's really important that we think about what we might do in the class with our students to help them understand how AI works. On my website, I have a couple of videos. One is a little bit longer. It's about 10 and a half minutes. So I know that's super long for students, but there's a quiz at the end of that one. And that one is what are large language models and what are some of the pitfalls? And students have to engage with that video and then take the quiz before they have access to the rest of the course material. I put that as a kind of gate in my LMS. The same thing with the second video that is much shorter. That one's about 4.5 minutes long, and it's on what are knowledge and learning and why are they still important in the age of AI. And if you have an asynchronous class, you can make a discussion post off of that. If you have a synchronous course, a face-to-face, then you could do a reflection piece, and then you can have in-class discussions on it. So students have the opportunity to start thinking about, well, what knowledge do they need to retain from different courses, and why does that knowledge need to be turned into learning? Why do they need to hold on to it? So for example, if it's a course that they're just taking to check a box. So for example, I took a flower arranging course in order to complete one of my art credits as an undergraduate. Loved that course. I don't remember a lot from it because I didn't have to turn that into deep learning and understanding. But in my English courses, and when I was a science major, in my science courses, it was important that I take that knowledge and turn it into deep learning so that I could move on to the next level and the next level. So if students understand why that idea of retaining information and doing the work on their own matters, then they are more likely to engage with the material and actually spend some time struggling with it. Then on the right side of the screen, I've given some ideas of ways we can play around with these tools. So we can have students ask ChatGPT a question and then Google that same question. And we can look at the differences in the usefulness of each. So I use cosmology because my cousin is a cosmologist, and I know almost nothing about the universe aside from the fact that he says it's still expanding. So that's what I got. But if I do a Google search on cosmology, it's going to bring up a whole bunch of articles that I can read, which is great if I already understand the topic. But if I don't understand the topic, it can be very hard to step right into those articles. So ChatGPT, I could get some references and obviously making sure that they're real. But then I could also ask it to go in and give me some definitions. And I could ask it to give me some summaries. And I could help get a foot into the door on the discussion so that then I can actually go out and read the articles. So I think that's one of the things that's really good to work with students on that reflection and figure out what's useful to them, what's valid to them, what are the similarities and differences. In the STEM courses, we can use ChatGPT to explain problem sets and then critique how well it did. So maybe you've got a chemical formula or a math problem that you're trying to explain, and it's really great if you can have a problem set that you come into class with beforehand that you know has a wrong piece in it. Because what you can do then is you can put students into small groups and you can ask them to find the error and ask them to explain what went wrong. And that helps them to understand that concept more deeply. It also helps them to understand that these AIs don't always get the explanations correct. And so they may still need to use their textbooks or go out and Google to understand the topic better or correctly. And then you could also have students look for sources on a topic and then reflect on how many of them were real or how many of them led to valid information. I talk about this in this way. So when we think about ChatGPT or any of these other AIs building us sources, it used to be that they could build us a source to get us to the edge of Oklahoma, but they couldn't get us any further into the state. And now they can get us to Oklahoma City, but they can't necessarily get us to a building within the city. And what I mean by that is that when AI is building these hallucinated references, they used to be pretty bad, but now they might take students or us to an actual journal that has actual information that we're looking for within that field. So perhaps it says that Smith wrote an article on birds in the journal Nature. Well, maybe Smith doesn't write about birds, but has published something in the journal Nature. So maybe that can take us there. Maybe somebody else has written about birds if that's what we're looking for. And then we can look through Nature. So it's gotten us to the city, and then we can figure out what it is within that journal that is helpful to us. So it's one of those things where having students reflect on how good those sources were, and then did they actually lead them somewhere helpful? That can be a really good way of playing around with the tools. Okay, AI detectors. I'm going to evangelize here for just a second. Don't use them. Don't use them. Don't use them. We just saw, I think it was about 2 weeks ago, OpenAI published a piece that said, hey, guess what? We've removed our AI detector because it doesn't actually work. And Turnitin went from saying, look at us, we've got this really great track record, to saying, oh, we're only like 94% accurate. And a lot of people would say, oh, well, that's great. That's not bad at all. But when we start to look at this, we see that these AI detectors are more likely to catch ESL and non-native speakers. We need to remember that Grammarly is an AI product, and any student who is using Grammarly is going to show positive for AI use. If we're dealing with zero level or remedial writers, if we're dealing with neurodiverse students, we see more pattern language sets being used, and the AI detectors are more likely to think that that information was written by an AI instead of a human. And when we think about these sort of things, I was in a conversation on Facebook with a woman, it was about 2 weeks ago now, who said that her advisor ran part of her dissertation through an AI detector and it came back positive. And it turned out that the section that got run through was definitions. So I'm not surprised that that came back positive. But what happened was then this woman who has done all this work, she's got her first draft of her dissertation together. She doesn't want to finish her PhD. She's so disillusioned by that. And you think about the damage that happens when we go into a classroom with the assumption that we are going to catch all the cheaters. And if we assume that our students are all trying to cheat from the get-go, instead of saying, let's learn about these tools together, right? There's a difference in that kind of classroom environment. And I want my students to feel comfortable. I tell them I'm not using the AI detectors. We do AI literacy. We talk about where AI can be used. We play around with it. They do reflections on it. Like there's so much happening in the classroom where they're using AI purposefully. And I don't feel the need to use these detectors. At the end of the day, I would rather have one or two students get something over on me and think that they're super awesome than have me be out trying to police everybody. One of the other things to think about with AI detectors is that they're only going to catch the students who aren't terribly technically savvy. The students who are technically savvy are going to have one AI program write their work, have another AI program fix it so that it sounds more human, and turn it in. And there are TikTok videos on how to do this, and it can take a student 5 to 10 minutes for the whole process. So those students aren't likely to get caught, but they still didn't do the work. And again, I'm not trying to set up a police state in my classroom. So I'm very much anti-AI detector. All right. So as we think about the future of AI, it is integrated already in so many places. It's in Google Docs. It's in Office if you can afford to pay for it. They just released Copilot, and that's $30 a month. I would love it, hint, hint, Amanda, if we could get it at UCO as a license, but I don't know if we'll get to that point quite yet. It's in LinkedIn. Every time I go to make a LinkedIn post, it asks me if I want the AI to write it for me. Students are using it in Snapchat. That was interestingly the place where a few students did raise their hands yesterday and say that they had used AI. It was in Snapchat to talk to that AI program. It's in web building tools. For all three of the web building options that I looked at, they all had AI assistance in them. So it's everywhere already. And if we're thinking about how students are going to be interacting with AI, not just right now, but in 6 months, in 8 months, in a year, in 3 years, whenever they graduate, students need to be aware of how the AI works so that they can actually figure out how to use it, right? They're going to be using that hybrid writing and that assignment creation, and that's just going to be normative behavior for them. Okay, so I wanted to take a few minutes at the end of that and give a chance for people to ask questions. You can just type them there in the chat if you have any. I know this was a very brief overview. Wanted to make sure that we had time for everything else today too.
Well, thank you, Dr. Dumman. I sure appreciate it. You certainly gave me a lot to think about. And yeah, we can take a couple questions before moving to the moderated panel discussion. And two things that stood out to me were, one, you asked your students if they're using it, and the only two said yes. They're probably all using it in some form. They just might not realize it. And
Yeah.
I taught high school way back in the day when Wikipedia was just coming online, and there was this hair on fire moment where we thought we're all our students are going to be using Wikipedia all the time. We had to ban it, and that similar that hair on fire reaction has kind of died down. And I think you're taking a very pragmatic approach here with AI as well. Jay says, what service do you recommend overall? And it looks like you've already responded. You like ChatGPT and Bing Chat right now.
Yeah.
And
Those two do the best of getting me the answers that I need. But again, I'm working in writing, so it kind of depends on just what field you're in. And yeah, I did want to say that with Wikipedia, you can now set up your courses to write a Wikipedia page. And next time I teach first year comp, I'm going to do that. So, how things have shifted in the last decade and a half, right?
how they have indeed. Jay asks, paid or free? I assume, do you personally use the paid or the free
I'm only
ChatGPT?
using free right now because I figure most of our students are only going to be using the free services, and I want to understand the technology from their perspective. So
Chuck asks,
no
have
chat.
any of you looked at POE?
I have not looked at that one. I will make a note to look at that one though.
Well, we are running like right on schedule. This is fantastic. I would encourage all of you. We're just getting started because now we're going to open up, or we're going to do the moderated panel discussion with questions that we've already sent the panelists, and then we're going to open it up to just general questions. So if you have questions, you can type them as we go, but we're not going to get to your individual questions for a little while yet. We've got the moderated panel going from here until 12:10. And for the next, until 12:10, we've got a series of questions that we're going to be asking the panelists that we've already sent them in advance so they can prepare a little bit. And so save your questions if you have questions, save them for the panelists, and we'll get to that about 12:10. In the meantime, I'm once again pasting the link to the contact sheet. If any of you would like to connect with Laura, well, I'll just go with first names. Hope that's okay. Laura, Bucky, Alicia, and Amanda. Their contact information is on that sheet, and you can enter your contact information if you would like to make sure others can get in touch with you as much or as little as you feel comfortable sharing. So with that, we're going to go into the moderated panel discussion. And we've got some questions here, and in no particular order. Like, all the panelists have gotten these questions before, just so they're able to kind of prepare a little bit. And in no particular order, we're going to be asking some of these, and some of the panelists have sort of claimed, like, oh yeah, I want to make sure to answer that one. We'll get to it as much as we can, but we'll just start out with a question that, and by the way, any of the panelists, please feel free to chime in on any of these questions at all. But certain people did put their name down as, like, they really want to make sure to get to that one. So we're going to start with Amanda. There's a question. How do you address fears and concerns regarding AI technologies? And again, any of the panelists can answer, but Amanda sort of put her name on that one as someone who would really like to chime in.
Yeah, so I think it's pretty common to have fears associated with this technology because, especially towards the beginning of the year, there was a lot of unknowns. And so, what I've always been telling individuals is that this technology is not actually new. It's a new iteration of it, a new version where it's becoming more well known. But that kind of thing has been out there for a long time. And kind of to Laura's point, some people have been using these types of tools without ever actually knowing it. The idea of chatbots have been around for quite a while now, and a lot of websites and universities are even using it. So that's one thing I try to tell people is, this is just a new phase in a technology that has been around for much longer than a lot of people realize. The other thing I try to tell people is that it doesn't have to be embraced completely all at one time. So you can take baby steps, and that is completely okay. It does not necessarily mean tomorrow you have to start incorporating this into your classroom and have new assignments designed around AI. That is a great thing, and Laura has done some amazing stuff and really kind of led the way on that. But you can just start by, hey, AI is out there and I'm aware of it, but let's talk about how I do or do not want it used in my classroom. Or, hey, I'm comfortable with you using it, but let's talk a little bit more about AI literacy, and baby step your way into kind of embracing it as overall. So those are kind of my two key things there.
That's a great answer, Amanda. I appreciate your perspective. If any of the other panelists would like to chime in, you're more than welcome to.
Yeah, I'd love to add that I wrote a piece on Medium back in the spring about being comfortable with the gray area and the unknown. And I think for a lot of us as instructors, we go in and we feel like we need to know all the things. But one of the things that working with Scholarship of Teaching and Learning and Transformative Learning both have taught me is that I can literally go into the classroom and say, I don't know what this tool is. Who's used it? Let's get into small groups and play around with it. And so being comfortable in that unknown space, saying to your students, I don't know what we're going to get here today. Let's try it out, and then let's do some critical reflection on it. I think that can help with some of the fear. I think one of the other things is simply to play around with these tools yourself and see what they actually can and can't do. So I know a lot of people were really concerned again with that cheating aspect, and it turns out that, it can, these chatbots and these large language models can do some things really well, but at other things they're just tripping and falling all over themselves. So I think the more you play around with them, the less it becomes a fear thing, and the more it becomes an, oh, okay, this is a tool and this is how I can use it.
I think that's really good perspective. And I appreciate both of you sharing that. Alicia, we've got a question that I'd like to direct your way. Many educators are worried about AI replacing human teachers. What's your perspective on the role of AI in complementing rather than replacing traditional teaching methods?
Thank you for the question. And so many things have already spoken to this, I think. So first of all, the perspective of I think it's a new term, this human-centric AI perspective. So we do things that humans do things that AI just simply can't do. We problem solve, we're creative. They are really good at giving us knowledge. And I think that, in a lot of capacities, teachers especially in higher education, we are content specialists. We know our stuff. We're expertise with all of this knowledge. And it's this sort of shift we have to sort of think of is our students have access to the knowledge in a different capacity than we did. I mean, we had encyclopedias and we had the library, but we can ask the most difficult question and get a really great answer, even leveled down for example, asking the bot to give it to us in a second grader's perspective. And so we have to sort of shift our thinking about how we can possibly give our students a different perspective on that content. And I really think that this is also the space where we can think about the relational piece that's often missing in education. We know, pedagogy tells us that our students learn the best when we have relationships with our students. And oftentimes we are so busy pouring all the content that we need to sort of barf on them, if you will. And this really, with the tools like AI, it gives us a space to have those relationships that possibly weren't, we didn't have the time to do that. So the fear of it replacing us, I think that is not the situation at all. Rather, it can enhance our ability to reach our students in a better capacity. Definitely a complement to our teaching, not only for our students, but also in the way in which we teach, the way that we bring the content to them. Because again, most of the time we're experts, for example, in geology or physics, but possibly not experts in the way we teach those subjects. And AI can help us think more broadly about the way we bring that content to them in a new way. So I think the new saying on the street is not if AI will replace us, but if we choose not to use AI, it's the people who are deciding, I can't do it. I want anything to do it. I won't experiment with it. Now I wouldn't say you still would be replaced. Teachers will never be replaced, but possibly our students will move past what we're able to give them, if that makes sense. So
yeah. That's a really great perspective, Alicia, and I like the positive, optimistic view of all this. Any of the other panelists want to comment on the question of your perspective in AI complementing rather than replacing traditional teaching methods? See, Bucky is unmuted.
Yeah, so obviously within teaching context, but I think even as this extends into the workplace and into careers, one of the things that I'm seeing and learning a lot about is that AI really benefits people who have deep expertise in certain areas more so than someone who's at just a surface level knowledge, right? So the more background and the more context and the more examples that we personally have in a particular area, we're able to leverage these tools in much more creative and effective ways than really just kind of glorified search engines in some cases, right? And so I think it's a reminder that we still have to do the hard work. We still have to really dive in and lean into learning and building human intelligence so that we can leverage the technology in the most optimal ways, right?
It's an interesting point about how AI helping people who already have a certain set of knowledge about a topic. I really appreciate that. I'm going to ask another question. Alicia has claimed this, and she has to, or she may have to leave early. So, Alicia, this is for you. You put your name on it, but of course, anyone can answer it. Are there some subjects in your experience that the use of AI tools would apply to, and maybe others that wouldn't quite as much? Like, that's nice for others, but it doesn't really apply to me.
Right. And that seems to make sense. I think the first notion of when AI came out, I think there was a heading, the death to the paper, or death to the research paper, because it writes, and we're thinking about text. So my overall answer would be that there's certain tasks that AI can better scaffold learners to. So for example, getting the knowledge as far as asking the question for specific content knowledge, but that can be in any subject. So if we think about maybe if we're thinking for our maths and computation that possibly because AI specifically in the large language models produces text in a conversational method. But one of the things it does so well, which I'm not a math person, but if I would have had this tool as a student where I could ask a tool like this to explain a math concept and how I got to that answer sort of in this Socratic method, I would have been probably less apprehensive to ask the amount of questions that I needed to. I'm sure we've all been in that situation where we've asked a teacher, they gave us the explanation, and we were just like uncomfortable to keep probing, maybe taking too much class time. So in regards to what it can do in different subject areas, it depends on what the goal is. And I think that at so one of the things I did in preparation for this was asked, I don't remember if it was one of the 4 tools that Dr. Dunham has mentioned. Those are all my favorites. I use them every day. But I asked for the tool to give me a list of all the sort of a broad stroke of what colleges have to or what they cover. I know what subject, what content area. And then I asked it to give me an example of how AI could help me in that subject area. And there was no area, where it wasn't able to show me a way to better understand that topic. And so for understanding, yes, but I think that one of the most core pieces in this conversation, and this was already addressed, is us as teachers are the most critical piece for understanding how students use these tools, because we are the expertise with knowledge, and we understand the gap between what deep learning is and what the surface level is. And so when we work, for example, with an audit with this particular assignment or subject, looking at all of the expectations or outcomes that our students want to, or we're expecting them to accomplish, and we experience that as experts and watch what it can and cannot do, and we look at the places where it impedes or helps with how that deep learning happens. We're just irreplaceable in that regard. So we're looking at the places where in the subject areas where we can scaffold that knowledge in the best way.
Yeah, what you're saying, Alicia, reminds me of the movie Terminator 2, when Sarah Connor's talking about how Arnold Schwarzenegger, this evil robot, actually would be a good father. And AI, if a student is asking questions of an AI tool, they're not going to get judged, and they're not going to get a sarcastic remark, or they're not going to get berated or feel like they're less of a person because of it. The AI will simply respond. And it's an interesting, what you said is interesting in from that perspective of how we engage with our students. And if our students are going to AI, maybe they feel scared to ask us, and maybe we should adjust how we build relationships in our classes. Any other panelists want to speak on that one, about some subjects that AI might apply to, but others that maybe not so much? And if not, that's fine. Got a question for Laura. What strategies, and when I say for Laura, it's anyone, Laura kind of put her pin on it. What strategies can higher education institutions implement to make sure that students and faculty are prepared to adapt to all of these changes? So what are some things that, like some practical strategies that we can do to help teach everyone and adapt?
I'd say things like what we're doing today are a great start. So we want to make sure that we have trainings available. If there are micro-credential options or workshops or something like that. But the more that we talk about these as tools, the more that we show what they can do, then the less fear, I think, surrounds them. The more that we say, hey, I tried it here and it worked. And we do that with our students over and over again, all semester long, till it just becomes part of what we're doing. And I think, unfortunately, in academia, we tend, and I'm not like criticizing you at all here, just so I'm clear, but we tend to expect faculty to give their time for free. And I think that universities may have to bring in paid speakers and paid workshop leaders to help their faculty really level up. I also think that following people on LinkedIn and seeing what they're doing, like I love what Ethan Mollick is doing, but he's teaching people how to fly, and I'm teaching people how to walk. So, you know, we need to have people like myself who are getting faculty and staff through the door so that then they can see what Ethan Mollick is doing and learn how to fly. So that's
I
kind
really
of
like that. That's a great analogy, and I think Amanda might have some perspective on this as well.
Yeah. So I think one of the worst things that higher education could do right now is to stick their head in the sand and ban AI. I think that is only going to cause more problems and more issues, rather than using this as the tool that it can be and is. Kind of to Laura's point. Um, my background is in educational technology, and I used to teach an ed tech class. And one of the things I always talk to my students about is that the worst thing they can do when introducing a new technology or using a new technology into their class is to use it once and then not use it again until like 6 weeks later, because then it becomes a toy and becomes a new, fun, exciting, different thing. And to make these become the tools that they are and be seen that way, they need to have regular use, regular discussions, regular exposure to that resource for it to be seen as the tool that it really is. I talk about that here at UCO as well with mobile technologies. It's going to seem like a fun tool until the students start realizing it's just like my pencil. I'm going to use this every day. It doesn't matter what else is going on it. And it becomes less exciting to them and becomes the resource that it really needs to be. And so I think we're going to have to treat this tool just like we do all of our other educational technology tools in the classroom.
Bucky, you had your mic unmuted, so
Yeah.
love to hear from you.
Yeah. So the other day I was just kind of got curious, and because I was reading some articles kind of about the resistance of AI, particularly in education. And I thought it would be fun to kind of go back in history and look at like social community responses of other types of innovations, right? And if you replace out like the Gutenberg press or the internet or whatever the innovation is, and you swap in AI, you would be surprised at how similar the words, the language are about the sort of innovation. And I think one of the ways that we can help our colleagues and our friends and the students ultimately, right, is to work out loud. And so when we're working on something and we're trying and we're tinkering, talk about it. Talk about the things where it works, times where it works, talk about the times when it doesn't. And what can we learn through those experiences that ultimately help advance our sort of collective knowledge and collective experiences with the technology.
This is great perspective. I'm so glad to hear from all of you on these issues. I appreciate that you're all offering like different ways of looking at these very complicated problems. I want to talk about one thing that maybe hasn't been discussed quite so much yet. And that is, it reminds me of a documentary I saw on Pixar years ago, and they were talking to John Lasseter, one of the directors of Pixar, and they said, well, we don't hire people who are computer programmers and teach them to animate. They said, we hire animators and creatives, and then we teach them how to use the computer because they need these foundational skills, and the computer stuff can come later. And so as AI tools become more prevalent, what are some skills and some knowledge, some things that educators and instructional designers can start working on and maybe acquiring to leverage some of these technology tools? And Bucky, you put your name on this, but once again, any of the panelists can feel free to answer.
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and one that's really interesting to me personally. I've always been sort of curious about the design of learning environments, whether they be built environments, digital environments. And historically, we've seen ourselves designing directly the environment, right? We would articulate our ideas in a medium, right? Whether it be through verbal presentation or through digital content and so forth. I think we are getting to a point where those skills are transferring a little bit to where we're actually having to design the algorithm, if you will, to then design the learning environment. And what I mean by this is if you take the design of like a tutoring application augmented through AI, we would never be able to come up with all the different combinations of a question that a learner might ask or the way they might frame it. But what we're having to do is sort of project and design things like prompts and how those prompts are structured to be able to respond to that. I'll give you a quick example. So I was running an experiment actually where if you take sort of a novice learner about learning a certain concept or topic, how we structure or sequence the order of like an analogy to an example might make it made a big difference, right? So if we provided an analogy first, that may provide a good overarching sort of connection to the concept we're trying to teach, and then followed up by an example. But if we have a learner who maybe has a little bit more experience in that particular concept, potentially that analogy is meaningless to them. It's like, yeah, I already know that, right? I don't need the analogy. But what they really need are different types of examples or contexts where that concept might find itself in. So if anything, I think it requires us as educators and designers of learning experiences to up our game, right? We can't just get away with putting information out there. We really have to think deeply about the complexity that is teaching, right? That is mentoring, that is coaching. And so for me, it's less about the particular technology or the tool, but rather the dispositions that we bring as educators to use whatever the tool that happens to be available to us, right? And that will just expand and grow and develop over time. So
Thank you so much, Bucky. Amanda, Alicia, Laura, any perspectives on that particular question about what skills or knowledge should educators, instructional designers acquire to learn how to effectively use these technologies?
Sure. I think remembering that critical thinking is the most important thing. So just because the AI spits it out doesn't mean it's real. And teaching our students to question things. I also think coming back, and I know we're all tired. COVID made us shift everything within a 2-week time period, right? And we all had to learn how to be online teachers. But really coming back and questioning, what are we teaching and why? What skills do we want our students to walk away with? What knowledge do we want them to walk away with? And if it doesn't necessarily matter how they get there, then maybe we don't use writing as the main tool anymore. Maybe we use something else, but really taking a hard look at our student learning outcomes and what it is that we're hoping students get out of it at the end.
Yeah. Alicia, if you saw, or I saw that you were about to unmute, so
Well,
any
I
other
won't go into
perspectives?
Yeah, I won't go into too much more detail, but I really think, as we are looking at our disciplines and we're thinking about exactly what Dr. Dunham had mentioned as far as why are we assigning these things? What's the end goal? What are our outcomes? We really have to think about, I think I would challenge, and I look forward to conversations with how will this knowledge go past my course and into the workforce? Because our students, I mean, wherever they go, they're going to be using these tools to function in their career. And so how do we start integrating that so they're prepared to go out and be effective and use those tools critically thinking, because they're that's the end goal. We're developing humans. We're definitely having them think critically, but we want to equip them for 21st century AI driven workplaces. So how, and it's uncharted waters at this point in time, but I think that would be advantageous for all of us to think about how are we going to shift to meet the needs of our students past our course.
Yeah, what you were just saying made me think of when I was visiting with my niece and she was talking with one of her friends on Snapchat, and I was like, oh, it sounds like you've had some interesting conversations. Her friend wasn't a friend at all. It was just the AI tool. And you mentioned that idea of looking at this, of thinking critically about AI, and this critical component of engaging with AI. that's not going away. That's going to be really important that we can help young people and everyone learn this. Amanda, do you have any input before we go on to the next question? And if not, that's fine. I just want to make sure everyone gets a chance. I don't want to cut anyone off.
Nothing that the other panelists haven't already said.
Okay, then I want to ask maybe a little more philosophical question to the panelists, not necessarily about technology. What about the ethics of all this? How can we, whether in from a perspective of teachers or me, I got kids. My kids are 12 and 9. And they don't yet have their own devices. They don't have phones. They don't even have iPads. It's like the Stone Age at my house. But not for long. How can we teach students to use AI tools ethically?
So I had my name on this question. I don't want to hog our a hard time together, but I think that's interesting that you asked. So I actually have 3 students at OSU, like 3 children. So I'm getting the full version of this, the full view from the faculty side and as a parent. I'll say, I feel like there's a threefold piece here. Obviously, it's the student handbook. I mean, we have to cover our tails as institutions in the same way that we have our syllabus attachment. That's a given. However, I feel like the next step is for each institution to think about how we can actually have our students engage in that in a relevant way. So who reads even though, again, my 3 kids, I'm like, read the syllabus. Did you read the syllabus? And you say it too, right? It's coming from all angles. And they're like, it's 27 pages long, Mom. I'm like, it doesn't matter. You have to read the syllabus. And so I think as institutions, we have to think about making these materials relevant. So how will they interact with that? So thinking about making it accessible on a phone, like whatever our policy is, so they engage in it. So that's the second step. Third, I think, and it's been expressed thoroughly here, we have to walk alongside our students to show what ethics is, because we're still figuring out. So whatever that assignment is, it's scaffolding them through, and very much it's been mentioned, like in the class or online or in asynchronous conversations, looking at what the output is for a certain assignment and deciding how they will turn that into their own work and what that looks like to cite that information. Because, K-12 students may have the opportunity to get these digital literacies taught in some capacities at their schools using AI tools. Whereas our hand that we have right now in our that we've been dealt is these students who are plopped into the middle. For example, my student, he's a junior at OSU in industrial engineering. He's trying to ask that question, like, how do I use this? Well, this is his first semester that he actually had one of all of his instructors give him any information in the syllabus, and it was, don't use it. But he's going to be in industrial engineering. I think it's that fear that's preventing us from doing that. And so being transparent and not coming authoritatively to the conversation, being student-centric, I think that is paramount in these times in this conversation.
Amanda, you had your name on that question as well. Do you have anything you'd like to add, or?
Just briefly, I really liked Laura's statement earlier about being comfortable with the gray. I think that's part of what we need to do to help students kind of understand that there's still a lot of questions surrounding ethics and personal property and intellectual property and all of those different things with this particular tool. So we don't have all the answers, and needing to be okay with not being the expert in this particular subject, and being able to pose those hard questions without having the answers and having those open discussions with our students about it. And instead of hiding from that particular conversation, I think that's where a lot of these gut reactions of don't use it because I don't know how to answer this question, so I'm just not even going to address it. And being able to be okay with not having that answer and saying, I'm not sure what the ethic is in this situation. What do you guys think we should do if you're posed with that particular concern. Should we use it? Should we not? What do you guys think? And having those conversations with them, especially we're with a group of students who hopefully are adults or at least adult-like in their courses, and who can maybe have those more intelligent conversations that you can in like a K-12 environment where students may still be kind of developing their own ideas. So I think it just opens up an opportunity, but we have to be willing to not know everything.
And that circles back to one of the themes of this whole discussion about treating AI as not to run from it, but as an opportunity to learn and to learn to use these tools effectively. We have just about 5 minutes left on this portion of the panel, and then we'll move to open-ended questions from all the attendees. Bucky, I've got one for you. What are some practical examples, if you know of any, some practical hands-on examples of AI applications in teaching and instructional design that have shown a lot of promise? If someone's attending this and wants to know, okay, this is all well and good, but I need some like solid, like some real life examples. Anything you might be able to share? And then of course the other panelists as well.
Yeah, I'll give you a few of them. So Laura mentioned this earlier. One of the tools that is there, for example, that I've really been liking is Gamma. And Gamma is kind of, think of it like a visual chat GPT almost, right? So it uses some of the same prompting, but its output is is visual in that regard. And so I think not necessarily from just a final output, but it helps us to think of our ideas in different ways beyond the verbal, right? Beyond the verbal language there. And I think that's a very important aspect for us to remember, particularly in instructional design. We get into sort of cognitive load and things like that. We want to balance visual and verbal channels as we're using multimedia. So I think that is one. One that I have really enjoyed a lot of and used a lot in my own practice is a tool called Notion. Now, Notion is essentially it's a note-taking tool, but it's much more than that. And like many of the tools, they've begun integrating AI within there. And what I like about it is it has some pre-designed prompts, so kind of the summarizing and things of that nature. But you also have the ability to add your own prompts to it. And so when you're thinking about how do I design, better, more measurable learning outcomes, or how might I create different examples of learning exercises that may align to these sorts of competencies, whatever your design question might be, it's an interesting way to almost be your kind of design co-pilot, and in some cases a contrarian, right? It's like, I would normally design it this way, but should I do that, right? Or what are some other ways that I might think about? And then the final example that I'll share is a tool called Moonbeam. Moonbeam is again, it's AI augmented, but what's really interesting about it is I believe they've done a nice job of the interface. So a lot of the tools that we see available to us are very chat driven, right? They're like, here's a prompt, here's the output. Moonbeam actually allows it to go in a kind of a word processing document, but then you can highlight and search and query certain parts of that document. So it's really great if you have information that you put in and you wanted to, let's say, write assessments that are aligned to that content. You can use those prompts to query it and essentially build content that is aligned to that assessment. So those are three that I use that I've found a lot of sort of inspiration and discovery around.
Looks like you're not the only one who uses Notion. Sephra in the chat said she uses it as well.
Yep.
Anyone else want to chime in real quick? We have just a couple minutes left about some practical applications of this. Well, this brings us to the end of this first part of our AI discussion here. And I want to thank all the panelists. We're not done yet. We're only halfway through this. But I want to thank all the panelists for giving us so much information and knowledge and so much of their experience. And now I'd like to open it up. Well, a couple things. Number one, just a reminder to anyone who has joined recently, there's a in the chat, you'll see a list or a link to a contact sheet. It's a bit.ly link. It's it's a sheet where anyone can enter contact information if you'd like to connect with people later outside of this panel. This has their names and phone numbers, any information that you would feel comfortable sharing. But I'm about to crowdsource something here. If all of you or whoever wants to is willing to go to that same sheet, you'll see a second tab at the bottom that says resources. What I'd like to do is ask the crowd to populate that with some of the resources that have been mentioned thus far. So we've got a ton of stuff that's come our way in the chat. And some things that the panelists have mentioned. If we could start collecting some of these resources, I've got 3 columns: name, URL of resource, and any notes like recommendations, best practices, and feel free to add other columns. If you think we're missing a column, please add that in. But there's so much that's been shared this morning that I don't want to lose track of it all. And Laura has a whole website, Dr. Dumman's AI repository, which you'll see at the top of the main sheet number 1 there. But as we go throughout this morning, if anyone would be interested in adding to that resources list with some of the things that we've talked about, or even things that you just like that we haven't mentioned, but just personal favorite tools of yours, as well as some addresses of some things, some of the AI tools, ChatGPT, of course, but we've heard a lot of other tools being mentioned this morning. So, oh, and Trevor said he popped in late. Yes, let me get you that link, Trevor, and for anyone else. And if we look at the schedule, we have 12:10 on our schedule for when we move to the moderated panel discussion with questions from attendees. So with that, I'm just going to open it up to any of the attendees to ask anything you want of the panelists, but please ask it type it in the chat rather than unmuting yourself. It's just easier for people to follow along if we can see it in the chat, and then we'll do our best to make sure that the panelists address any questions you might have. I'm going to just pause my talking, give you all a chance to think for a little bit, and take a breath and have a sip of coffee here. A lot of good stuff being shared already in that resources. Thank you so much, everyone. Crowdsourcing is great. So we've asked a lot of great questions of the panelists. Now, for any of the attendees, if you have questions of your own, this is your chance to ask the experts and get their thoughts on anything that has been on your mind that's been brought up this morning that you want to revisit. This is just an open-ended Q&A time. So Crystal asked, how long will it take for AI to be mainstreamed / normalized? That's a great question, Crystal. Thanks for asking.
I think as long as it takes us to actually do it, which is maybe a little flip, but I think the more educators who are on board with mainstreaming it into our classrooms and places where it makes sense to do so, then the faster it will catch on as a tool instead of people still thinking of it just as a cheating mechanism.
Yeah, this is also one area I believe where education has the opportunity to kind of be out front in the innovation. People that I speak with that are in fields that use a lot of proprietary information, they are very hesitant to really get too far into AI just because of data privacy and concerns there. And so, so I think that is going to be one of the indicators of how quickly AI is adopted within a particular industry.
I don't mind giving a stab at one of our first questions. One of the questions was, what's an example of an assignment that generally introduces students to AI for first classroom use? Since we're so broad and maybe possibly the context we're talking about, I think I don't think, just kind of in hinting over to what Becky just brought up. selecting a tool, whether that's one of the 4 we've mentioned today, and opening up the disclaimer. So when we sign up, there is a disclaimer about the way in which the content is used, and asking that particular tool to give us a summary, and what we should be concerned and know about as teachers and as students. And then I think that's just really broad. So then students could have a general understanding of what that tool does. For example, the ones that have never tried it or admittedly tried it. And then that can very much move into your content area. So then that gives an open door to talk about how your specific discipline does well with this part of AI or doesn't. And then you can start thinking about integrating it to another assignment. But I think that, again, back to the idea that this digital literacy that our students have in certain capacities, but now with AI digital literacy, really equipping them to understand with what they put in those tools and understanding what we're giving away or what we need to hold back.
Another thing that I really like as a kind of a first dipping your toe into the water of AI use is giving students the opportunity to use it as a brainstorming mechanism as opposed to actually producing final content for them. And so being able to see it as a place to, get their brain going. Having them come up with ideas for a project or have them come up with a potential outline for a paper they need to write, or something that will help them kind of use it at the beginning stages, but then your expectation as the instructor is that they will move beyond that and take that as their starting place and produce something of their own. And so helping for them to see the distinction between when I'm using it as a tool and when I'm writing my own content, and whether that's writing or any kind of context that you might be using it for, but using it as that beginning part, because everybody reaches that phase where you're stuck mentally, you're exhausted, you can't come up with new ideas, and knowing that this is out there to help them get over that little hump and maybe say, oh right, that's my ideas were aligned with that, or I had some other things that I thought that were in opposition to maybe what is presented from the AI tool, and using it to kind of kickstart things, I think is a fun way to kind of just get started with it.
Yeah, Amanda, that what you said reminds me of, I attended Alicia's workshop a couple weeks ago, and she said she recommended using it to enhance things. So not, it's kind of like the other side of the coin. And the example she used was, let's say you're trying to write learning objectives. So if you come up with 5 or 6 learning objectives for a unit or a lesson, you can ask an AI tool to enhance those learning objectives and kind of punch them up a little bit. And I tried it and I was amazed. It did such a good job of getting me out of the headspace I was stuck in and helping me see things from a different perspective. So it took the seed that I had planted and it grew it into something a little bigger. And I really appreciate that. Also, I'm looking at my second screen here. Lots of resources being shared, and someone went and added another page called example assignments. So thank you to whoever did that. And please feel free to populate that with any example assignments that you would like to share. Which actually leads us to our next question in the chat. Linda says, what's an example of an assignment that gently, and I like the word gently, that gently introduces students to AI for first classroom use?
Linda, you know me, I don't do anything gently. But I do like bringing in maybe a reading prompt. So if we're looking at a piece of literature, Linda's also an English professor, so I feel like I can talk to her in that way. If we're looking at something that our students were supposed to have read for that day, then maybe show them the responses that AI came up to for the discussion questions that you had, and use that as perhaps a jumping off point, as a critical thinking space to see what it can do and what it can't do, and perhaps showing them that it's actually not that's different from what they might be writing on their discussion questions, and then discussing with them why they should do it themselves and not offload it to the AI.
We've got a question from Sephra. It says, what would you say? And man, a ton of great questions coming in. This is this is great. What would you say to an educator who's worried in a general sense about our students not developing some of these skills, these writing communication skills, because maybe they're a little too reliant on AI?
I guess as the writing instructor, I can work on that one for a second here. One of the things that I do with all of my papers now is that if a student turns in any references, they have to turn in an annotated PDF along with that reference that shows which quotes they used, maybe where something led them to another article, or where they feel like authors are in conversation with each other. And that forces students to do research and actually interact with the research information. And then they have to figure out how to put that information into whatever the AI wrote or whatever they've written. So even if AI does put together some sort of draft for them, they still have to go back in and fix it themselves to add in their research. So I think if we're doing things that force students to interact with work and then do some of the writing themselves, then we can show students where hybrid is okay. And then, for example, reflections. It doesn't make sense to have AI write your personal reflection for you because it's not you. And so in that case, showing students here, we need you to actually do your own work because this is supposed to be your ideas. But over here, you can do hybrid work. So that's one of the ways that I'm dealing with making sure that my students are still practicing writing, even with the AI.
Someone, Melissa said, isn't this just the same as being able to use a calculator, but showing your work? And that seems like it's like using the correct formula, putting the correct variables by showing the prompts and the iterations and how they finalized the output.
I guess I'll talk again. I'm going to say no.
Sure. Okay.
And the reason why I'm going to say no is that a calculator is only going to come up with one answer, and it's going to be the same answer every time for the same prompt. But any of these AIs are going to come up with a different answer every single time, even to the same prompt. So students need to understand how to prompt well, and then they need to understand what to do with the output. It's not just 3 + 5 = 8. Okay, I'm going to write down 8. It's literally then understanding how to interact with the output and make it usable.
That's a good perspective on all this. Bucky, you had
I would
mic on.
add, even as an example on an assignment, to construct or design a prompt. I have found that some of the most intellectually challenging processes is how to write the prompt to get to an output that is formatted in the way that you want. So I think that could even be a great idea.
And I have to say, Becky, I really love that idea for an assignment, is coming up with the prompt, because honestly, some of the discussions that I've had, even with my team here on campus, is, okay, so we wanted to use it for this thing, but it took what to get there, to get to a final output that was actually useful and helpful to us. And a lot of that is thinking through the details about, what do I need to know? What does my end product need to look like? Why is what they gave me not working? What piece did I miss in the puzzle that I did not explain to the tool? Did I not tell it the age range, or was I not explicit enough in the type of thing that I'm looking for? And it's a really great critical thinking kind of exercise, and it could be a really, really interesting assignment for a class to kind of go through that process.
Amanda, that's actually part of what I'm going to be doing in the spring. I'm teaching an AI and writing class, and so we're going to be prompting and we're going to learn how to do prompt writing, and then we're going to reflect on our prompts and whether or not they worked. And so that's going to be part of the process of just learning how to use the systems.
On the sheet, on the contact sheet, I'll put another link in the chat. Some of these are really good ideas to share in the example assignments tab. I think, Chuck, you said your copy paste wasn't working. Hopefully we can help figure that out. But some really good ideas coming in throughout these discussions for example assignments. And if anyone has things that they would like to share, or even share on behalf of someone else, if a good idea gets said, and even if it's not your idea, feel free to put it down in that example assignments. Travis had a question that I remember dealing with this when I worked with Shauna over at Spirit School of Business years ago about taking exams, and how do we make sure that we can ensure students are not cheating on exams, especially when taking online classes where they're not in our classroom. So Travis says, if AI detection tools have questionable efficacy, and we know that most students can easily alter AI generated material, what can we do to promote academic honesty, academic integrity on exams, particularly in an online environment? And Travis, that's a great question.
So I'll take a stab too on this, and I'm sure all of us have ideas. I did a previous workshop before we did a pragmatic workshop on how to use AI tools, but I think where we are in education is it's very much the idea of pushing us into new spaces about how we approach the way we teach and assess. So I'll use the word authentic learning and learning and assessment. So it may be that we have to get out of our typical teaching zone where we're comfortable. This is disruption. And so thinking about new approaches of how we assess our students. And so this very traditional method of using a high stakes final summative test where it's multiple choice, or even writing. I would highly encourage anyone in that space to use ChatGPT to learn about authentic learning and assessment, or other research. I mean, because the research is there. Pedagogical research says that when we put our students in authentic learning environments where they're able to apply and critically think in ways that are not high stakes, one-shot online tests, we give them intrinsic motivation to learn, and intrinsic motivation to critically think, where we're not memorizing and spitting out information in 1 hour on an online exam. And so this could be a whole nother session just on authentic learning and assessment. So I would highly recommend that we think about those specific practices and how we can augment them to meet this disruption with authentic learning, and re-examine the way we assess our students to tell them that we want them to think critically and deeply about that content, where it's not in just 1 hour of online exam.
And I just up that one. Seriously, we know that process matters over product. What I've seen in some of my STEM colleagues is that they're doing quests now instead of tests. So maybe they have a quiz at the end of every week and a quest, like part quiz, part test, at the end of every 2 weeks. And then what students can go back and do is, instead of saying, it's an all or nothing, maybe you allow students to correct all of their wrong answers for half credit or partial credit in some way. So again, you're taking away the high stakes and you're giving students other opportunities to still explain their learning, show their learning, and not feel like they always have to get the right answer. I also tell my students in all of my writing classes that failure is part of the process. And when we're doing research, we might have to look at 10, 20, 30 different articles to find 5 that actually tell us what we need. So I ask students to build in space for failure so that they don't feel so stressed when they get to that last minute and all of a sudden nothing's working the way that they anticipated it. And to that end, I scaffold everything. So we're going to have 2 resources due this week and 2 due next week, and so on and so forth, so that students also don't have the opportunity to get to the end of something and feel like they have to do it all at that moment. So again, process wherever you can.
And some of this comes back to the relationship building component, which is difficult to do, I know, in a large class. But the more that we can build a relationship with our students, the more that there's research that shows that students who have a relationship with their professor are less likely to engage in academic dishonesty. And if we work to foster that good relationship, even in an online class, then that's one way to make sure our students, or to help make sure our students are not cheating. Bucky or Amanda, any thoughts on that one, on the issue of academic integrity in online classes, especially on exams? And if not, that's fine. I just want to make sure everyone gets a chance.
All I'll say is, if there is a way to cheat, students are going to figure it out and make it happen. And so all we can do is our best to encourage them not to. And I think the strategies that the panelists gave are fantastic. But I think the realistic, maybe pessimistic view is that it's not always going to be 100% successful on our end, and we have to kind of accept that. But I think Laura said earlier, I'd rather two people slip through the cracks and get one over on me than for the whole class to be not punished, but for it to be detrimental to everybody involved, because I start using these like really restrictive approaches, or I start banning it, or I start using the AI detectors as a way to prevent it. So we got to do our best, and I think these are good suggestions for that.
+1.
I see, Bucky, you've got your mic on.
Yeah, I just echoing +1. Yeah.
Yeah, it's going back to some of the things we talked about an hour and a half ago when we started, this idea that rather than having a more of a knee-jerk reaction to these new technologies, whether it's Wikipedia or the cell phone, and wanting to just shut it down and ban it because our students are going to abuse it in class, maybe it's worth thinking about it from the other side of the coin of, how can I embrace this and not treat my students as though they're all cheaters, but how to help them use it effectively so that they don't cheat, and so that it can be another useful tool to add to our toolbox. I'm looking through the chat for questions, and one person said, Linda said, is there a good source for how to prompt well? Which is, I kind of want to expand that a little bit to the four of you. We've seen a lot of this. I've seen like LinkedIn ads come through my email about jobs that pay so much just for writing prompts. It seems like that's its own little cottage industry. What are your thoughts on helping students, or anybody really, learn how to write good prompts for some of these AI tools?
There are a number of people on LinkedIn who are doing this just all the time. I point out Lance Cummings and Jason Gulia. I think Lance Eaton might be doing something too. There are a couple of Lances and I get them confused. But for starters, just Googling how to do it, and then literally just sitting there with students and reflecting. Did this give you what you wanted it to do? Okay, what's our next prompt? So explaining to students that yes, you're going to write a prompt and you're going to get a response, but then you don't stop there. So like Amanda said, it's a toy if we just use it every once in a while, but you continue to drill down. So what's next? What's our next thing that we're going to ask it? How are we going to refine it? And you keep doing that until you get the answer that you want. And then again, have students reflect on it. So I think building that into a class, if you have the space to do so, if it makes sense to do so. I also think that prompt engineering and prompt writing, I'm going to give it a 6 month to 1 year lifespan before I think that job is gone. Because I think by that point, enough people are going to know how to do it themselves that they're not going to be willing to pay $20 for 100 prompts, or, even $5 for 100 prompts. So I think, it's really cool that there are people who are out there doing it right now, but I don't think it's a long-term job.
I think one of the things, I'd love a guide that I could just reference for forever that tells me how to do these kind of things. But unfortunately, with the speed that this type of technology is evolving at, that the prompts we use today are not going to be effective prompts in 2 months. And so I think back to the point of we have to learn the process. That's what we really need to focus on rather than what is a good script for us to use at this point in time. It's not a bad way to start maybe, but it's definitely something that I think we're going to need the skills to critically think about the response and figure out where our gaps are and what we need to improve the next time we ask. I think that's where the skills lie.
I would also add that both the prompt and the models and the tools that we are always shifting, right? And so as we learn a prompt that works really well with one model, over time that model will adjust and change, which also means we have to learn how to communicate with the machine essentially in a way that is optimized as well. So the one common skill in all this is learning. We always have to be self-learners.
I like that, Bucky. The one common skill in all of this is learning. And I'm actually going to use that as like a bit of a transition. We've got the last part of our session here today. And I just want to commend all of you. This is like a monumental achievement. We've have currently 86 people still with us after more than an hour and a half. And to me, that speaks to how engaging Amanda, Bucky, Laura, and Alicia, who just had to step out, how engaging and interesting your thoughts have been. Numbers, you can't fake that. So if we only had 20 people left, we would know by now that, yeah, things aren't going so well. But the fact that you have been able to captivate this audience, a huge audience, and retain them for an hour and a half, that speaks highly of the quality of information you're providing here. I also, I kind of want to migrate this though into the final stage, which is just sort of open-ended for the participants. Closing comments, wrapping up. If you could leave, and I'll have each one of you offer some, and it can just be off the cuff. If you have something prepared, that's fine. But if you could leave us with some closing comments or things to think about as we go back to our normal lives and everything else, what would you say to wrap this up for some just closing thoughts and comments? And I'll just leave it open-ended. And but I would like Amanda, Bucky, and Laura to I'd like to hear from all of you, even if you don't have a lot. If you're just like, I'm good, that's fine too.
Okay, I'll go first.
Someone's got to go.
Someone's got to go. It might as well be me. I think that approaching it away from the fear cycle is super important. So as we go forward, again, seeing where it makes sense to put it into your classroom and not being afraid of our own failure. Sometimes we're going to walk in and we're going to try something out and it is going to bomb. And sometimes we can look at our classes and we can say, you know what, that didn't work. We're going to end early today and we'll come back and try again tomorrow. Or we can even spend time and say, okay, this didn't work. Let's think about why it didn't work. And we have to not be afraid of that. And then we have to not be afraid to try out these programs for ourselves. Like, they don't do a lot for me with most of the writing that I'm doing right now because most of what I'm doing is personal writing. But if I have to do job type of writing, then it can be really helpful as a starting place. So again, don't be afraid, just play with them and reserve judgment until you've actually tried them out.
I like it.
Yeah, I'll go. So I think, a piece of advice that I would give is lean in, but be skeptical at the same time, right? Everything that we do should be, engaged in discovering new things and learning. But I think we also want to apply that critical thinking to our work. And an example of one area that I'm particularly kind of concerned, I guess, around AI is even the environmental impacts of AI, right? What does it cost from a carbon standpoint to train a model and to use a model? And I think, that's something that we haven't touched on so much today, but those sort of things are the systems in which AI is working and evolving and developing, that we just need to be good stewards of the resources and things of that nature. So that's kind of the idea of lean in, but be skeptical. And then I guess I would leave is, work out loud, right? Share with people and engage in a conversation, because I paused at the idea of notioning us as experts, because I don't think anyone is an expert in this, right? We're just trying to learn and figure it out, and let's do it together, right? Yeah.
So I like to use the term cautious optimism when I approach this piece of technology, this tool, because I think we need to be critical thinkers about what we're doing with it. We need to question the tool and its use and how we're going to do things, but do it optimistically, because I think there are some really good things that have come from this and are going to continue to come from this particular technology. And so I'm going to think about it critically. I'm going to ask it the tough questions, but I'm going to try to find some good things to come from it. And I just want to encourage everybody to think of it as another resource in your toolbox, because just like every time a new technology comes out there, we have to figure out what to do with this. And this just happens to be the latest one. And there'll be other things that'll come in the future, and we'll have to do this all over again. So, this is another little quiver in our arrows, or how does that arrow in our quiver? However that phrase works, as another resource that we can use. And I think the one thing that I'm curious about to see how the future unfolds with this is AI and intellectual property, and how things are determined to who owns it. How do you use that, and at what point does it become a specific person's versus this entity? And I think there's still a lot of questions surrounding that, but I'm really interested to see where that kind of lands as we move through the future. So I think that's it.
I want to add one more thing.
Go ahead.
As we think about, for those of us who are teachers, we don't have to abandon everything that we've learned about pedagogy. If you have the opportunity to participate in your pedagogy work groups or book groups or whatever, take the time to go back and do that. If you're not comfortable with some of those things, if you haven't had the chance to be in some of those groups, I try to be in between 3 and 5 book groups a semester, because I want to keep learning how to be a good teacher. And I want to keep interrogating my own teacher. And yeah, the AI's here. And yes, that's going to change how I'm going to do some things, but some things aren't going to change because of the AI. So don't feel like you have to throw everything out just because AI is here. Go back to some of those teaching skills that you have, and really maybe play around with that and see where you can fit new things in.
Well, I've got I'm just going to kind of see if we can land this plane a little bit here. Laura, Bucky, and Amanda, thank you so much for sharing your nearly 2 hours of your very valuable time with us. One thing that one word that I've heard a lot is resource. And I want to hammer that point home, that everyone attending this session has some amazing resources at your disposal, particularly the people. So I would encourage you, there's been a lot of good things shared in chat. I would encourage you to visit that link that I've shared like 20 times. In case you haven't been there yet, save that and bookmark it, because the people in this call, both the panelists as well as the other people here, we're all learning this together. And like Bucky said, I don't even know if there is an expert, because all of us are learning, but lean on each other and follow up. If you have a question for someone, you've now got their phone or their email, you've got their institution and role. So follow up with people on this panel and on this whole call. That's what we're here for. We're here to help each other, and we're here to help everyone learn from all of this. And the second thing I want to do to kind of bring this all home is Catherine Earl Wilcox said, we need to do this again as it continues to evolve. I agree. and just like we were discussing the prompt generating the LinkedIn posts about learning to prompt and all that. Yes, we should do this again. And I don't want to say we will, because I don't like to promise something that I'm not sure I can deliver, but you're loud and clear. We hear you. And so Alicia and Crystal and I we would love to host this again. Maybe next year, maybe next spring, we don't know. But if there's a demand for this, then we would love to make that happen. So with that being said, one last time, I'm going to share the link if anyone wants it. Enter any contact information you want. I want to thank the panelists again, Amanda, Bucky, Laura, and Alicia, who's not here. And thank you to everyone who participated. This was fantastic. I appreciate you spending time with us.